Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. I would be remiss if I did not mention what an absolutely gorgeous afternoon it is today, and I'm giving everyone permission to go take a walk after this webinar is over because it's great out. So welcome to today's webinar. This is part 2 of our Getting Back to Work series. Today's conversation will be network focused. This is actually our encore presentation of this webinar. My name's Dennis Walker. I wear a couple different hats for IntegraONE. I'm the director of our recruiting offering. I am the office manager down in our Fort Washington office, and I'm also an account manager. So today's discussion is going to include network security and managed services, preparing your network for the increased load as people return back to the office, and as they come back, managing their devices when they return. And at the end of the first part of this webinar, we are going to open up the floor to questions. So if you have any questions while our engineers are talking today, please go to the right side of your screen. You'll see the little chat tab. You can click on that, put your questions in, and as we get to the second part, we will address those. Let's look at who's on the call today. So Brad Reitmeyer is our VP of Service Operations. Brad has been with IntegraONE for 6 years, and he provides the strategic and operational leadership to IntegraONE's pre-sales and technical delivery teams. Brad, thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon, Dennis. Thank you.
Aaron Morick is our Director of Network Services. Aaron came to IntegraONE through an acquisition of another company. He's been with IntegraONE for 2 years, but Aaron actually has 20 years in the network space, and he specializes in complex network architecture and design. Thanks for joining us, Aaron.
Good afternoon, Dennis.
Al Kale is our Security Practice Manager. Al's been with IntegraONE for 4 years. He is a certified ethical hacker and certified security analyst. Al, thanks for being here.
Yep. Thank you, Dennis.
And Joe Consolmagno heads up our managed service offering. Joe has also been with IntegraONE for 4 years, and he has 10 years in the managed services space. Joe, thanks for joining.
You're welcome.
So just kind of a quick review of where we want to focus today. But let's jump in to our topics. And Aaron, I think we're going to start with you and preparing the network for the increased load. So if you can speak a little bit about the potential increased load to the internet and to the network as people return back to their office, and then managing and updating core networks, how secure SD-WAN plays into this, wireless switching. Can you talk a little bit about how we should prepare for this next phase?
Absolutely. Two main points here. I mean, the first thing is you need to have a baseline of where you're starting from. What kind of bandwidth utilization is currently on the network, and what are the demands? Are the circuits and things that you're using for communication reliable? Are they performing how they should? And that all starts with a solid network monitoring, implementation or package. There's many of them out there, some that are open source, free, some that are paid. The key thing here is to be able to make sure that you have a historical view of the bandwidth utilization, uptime, and also some performance statistics on the network as a whole. Without that type of information, you won't know if you're up against a bottleneck or a potential bottleneck if there's some more load that's added to the network. It's important to look at not only just bandwidth utilizations on things like MPLS circuits, internet circuits, and things like that, but you're also looking for key metrics such as delay, packet loss, jitter, all of which could be indicative of larger issues that could be occurring on the network that you don't know about. One such issue might be what they call microbursts of traffic. Those are typically not picked up by just looking at a network bandwidth consumption chart. These are short little durations of traffic that are kind of seen from a network, the network device perspective, but not picked up in historical views of bandwidth. And if those exist on the network, they can cause user experience issues, especially when dealing with applications like voice, video, and very time-sensitive data. So starting from the networking monitoring perspective, that would be step one. Step two would be really to make sure that your network architecture is up to date and utilizing all the neat little things that we can do with today's technology. And one of those key areas is SD-WAN. Traditionally, when you design networks, going back a few years, you may have the wide area network may be comprised of an MPLS circuit for primary transport. You may have an internet circuit that doubles as VPN transport between sites if that MPLS fails. But typically those two transports are used independently, meaning that you're normally going to be utilizing your MPLS for communications, but only failing over to that secondary transport if you had a complete failure of the primary. With the SD-WAN technology that's available today, that doesn't have to be the case. We can leverage active circuits, utilize both MPLS and internet for different types of traffic and load balance between them. Some of the additional benefits from SD-WAN are you don't necessarily have to fail over or move traffic due to a complete failure of the circuit. You're really watching the health of the circuit. Not only is it up or down, but is there a significant delay? Are we seeing jitter, which is the difference in delay between packets, or are we seeing packet loss? And we can update the routing decisions on the network based upon those metrics, not relying upon the circuit to go hard down before doing that. And in the end, if you combine all that kind of stuff together, you're really looking at providing a great end user experience so that they don't notice any of the issues and is more proactive.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. What about Brad, in a situation where you maybe didn't have anybody working in the office, right? So as far as where I'm going.
Yeah, absolutely. So there may have been a number of times where nobody was in the office or maintaining the equipment that's there, or there was a lot of apprehensiveness to patch the edge, to patch anything that might have affected remote user connectivity. So you may be sitting in a situation where operationally you're behind from a patching perspective, or certainly from a security perspective that you do not have the appropriate patches on your equipment, whether that's the internet edge or your core routing or switching, handle any security issues as they come back in again. So one thing we recommend is taking a look at that while you're out, and this is what we're doing. We're taking a look at our components and seeing where they're at a patch level and coming up with a plan to get them up to speed at the appropriate times before we have an influx of traffic back into our network reaching out to the internet, making sure we're secure and operationally stable.
Thanks, Brad. So let's talk about the second part of this everybody working remotely situation, and that's bringing all of these devices back onto the network. So this was probably the most unusual part about the current situation, right? We have more people working remotely now than we ever had. So, and this is probably Aaron and Al. You think you guys could talk a little bit about reviewing policies, security profiles that maybe were changed when people went to go work remotely, and what we need to think about as we bring them back. And then in addition to that, we may be in a situation, I think we're going to be in a situation here where we have half our workforce in this week, the other half is in next week. So they're kind of going back and forth from remote to in the office. So what are the kinds of things we should be thinking about, considering in that situation?
Yep. So one of the first things to address here is, the changes that were potentially made to the network to support the large amount of remote users, due to the situation that we have currently going on. We fielded a lot of phone calls from our customers looking to, ramp up remote VPN access, make certain services available to users remotely. And sometimes they were planned out and well vetted, but sometimes they were also very reactive because they needed to keep things moving in their business. So, as we made those changes and helped these customers through those type of situations, it's very important to, go back and review those changes that were implemented. Make sure that they were implemented the correct way. Make sure there's no security holes in opening up VPN access or opening up certain applications to the employees remotely. That goes, a lot of the customers that I've talked to personally, they really utilize remote VPN access for their network administration staff only. So, they had profiles that, when the user connected to the network via the VPN, they had full-blown access to everything, as a network admin should. But as users started going remote, the question really needs to be asked is, do the remote employees need the same full boat access as the network administrators do when working remotely? Making changes and implementing changes like that on the fly in response to, the very quick work from home mandates is challenging. And, so those type of policies and procedures that were put in place to enable that workforce to work remote, should be reviewed to make sure that they're as secure as possible. And, Al could definitely, comment more on the end stations and how to bring those back on site in a secure manner. So Al, if you want to take over for me.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, going back to the review on policies from the security perspective, right? Kind of a double-edged sword. So, absolutely, if you had to poke holes in the firewalls to allow applications, to be exposed to the internet that didn't, that weren't typically accessed through VPN, those rules should be reviewed and buttoned down if possible. But we had some questions come up. Well, half of our staff is still working remotely, and some of the users are coming back into the office. So what do I do there? Likewise, if a policy needs to remain in place to support those users yet, maybe it's a good time to kind of multi-layer, the security, right? Terminal service is now exposed, which it wasn't previously. We need to keep it open. Maybe we look into multi-factor authentication. Kind of layer on security to get, keep those services exposed. So that's, a common thread that we've been running into. Continuing down the security path, let's talk about migrating the devices when they come back to the network, right? A few topics have surfaced there, engaging with clients lately. One that keeps coming up, mitigating the risk of newly installed applications, right? So we need to ensure that the systems are sanitized, and any undesirable software is removed, before those devices connect back in. Kind of gonna share a personal story here. So, my daughter's 3 years old. She's very curious. She's very clever. She too is working from home right now, right? We're doing educational videos, training. She's working with her, her pre-kindergarten teachers remotely. They're doing, WebEx and Zoom meetings. On that note, being curious and clever, right? I got to worry about if my laptop's left unattended and she, was to, take a hold of it, there is a possibility that she could fire up a web browser and start, searching around for, those videos that she likes so much. To that point, then I got to worry about, well, hey, if my computer's not locked, right? What if she accidentally clicks on a link, that's something malicious, installs a piece of software, malware, whatever the case may be. So definitely, before devices come back onto the network, now that may or may not apply elsewhere, but, we definitely got to make sure that we're sanitizing systems before they connect. Definitely want to take care of any software that was installed, that might be malicious, might not be a part of the corporate policy. Make sure we handle that before the devices reconnect. Another topic that keeps coming up is, patch status. operating systems, applications. As the employees and the devices return, complete visibility is really going to be key here. What's your insight today? Do you have complete visibility, including the software and the patch status? Is your visibility limited, completely unknown? We've implemented social distancing and self-quarantining to prevent coronavirus from spreading. Same rules apply here. We want to prevent any electronic versions of malware from spreading, right? So, definitely making sure that systems are patched, all the operating systems, the applications are up to date. Any applications that are unwanted, making sure that they're removed before they connect. How do we handle those devices connecting into the network? So, one thing I'm really fond of is quarantine networks. And, using network access controls, we kind of posture devices, we enforce compliance policies, and we posture devices by interrogating them before they come onto the network. Now, if a device fails, a posture check, typically we move that automatically into a quarantine network where they might have limited, internet connectivity. This way they can install patches, stuff like that. And then once the system is scanned again and, determine that it's safe and clean, then we allow it onto the corporate resource. If you don't have network access controls, you don't have to go and implement a NAC solution. This is something that can be done manually as well, which may be spinning up a temporary SSID. We bring the devices in, we manually put them on the wireless network. The same could be done on the wire, right? Where we spin up a VLAN that has internet access only. It's going through the firewall. It's blocked from, all the internal resources are blocking that network internally. This way we can, manually sanitize those devices before they're actually connecting to the corporate network. Likewise, we can look at, implementing network access controls, to make that an automated process. And Dennis, I'm going to hand it back to you. If we want to talk a little bit more about, patching maybe and managed services there.
Yeah, thanks, Al. That was good. Yeah, so when I hear this, and not being overly technical myself, there's a lot of things to consider here, right? There's a lot of checks and balances, if you will. So Joe, this is coming back to you, and how can managed services help an organization maybe alleviate some of these things that they have to do, or help support them in different ways? What does managed services offer from a network perspective, security, patching, all the things that these guys have talked about to this point?
Yeah, so one of the things that our customers saw that are enrolled in our managed services packages is consistency. So one of the things that we do with all of our customers is we make sure that Microsoft patches, Adobe, third-party updates, Java, etc., are being applied in a timely manner. So we have patch policies set up with each one of our managed services customers, about 140 at this point, where we're looking after all their devices, and we have familiarity with each one of those customers, where we know what devices need to be patched in this manner and in another manner, and how long can they go without being in compliance. And when they fall out of compliance, say that's 7 days, we reach out to the user. So that has all been in place on all of the endpoints that we've been covering, which is roughly about 5,000 or so at this point. So if customers weren't turning on their PC, or they weren't bringing a device home, a laptop, desktop, etc., and it wasn't being powered on, if those machines fell out of date by 7 days, 10 days, we reached out and said, hey, are you aware that these patches haven't been applied? These are crucial to our network. So that's one way we looked at the desktops and the endpoints. The other side of it is the servers. So the servers are still sitting at the client locations, wherever those locations may be. And as customers started to move to their homes and such, there wasn't any visibility into those devices. If a drive failed in a RAID, how did that get looked upon? Well, with the managed services package, we got notified of that. Just Monday, one of our engineers saw that there were a couple drives failed in one of the servers, and ordered them. They arrived yesterday, and our engineer put them into the RAID, reconfigured it, etc. So those things are being done. The consistency of going through and making sure all the devices are up to date, as well as there's no performance issues. So when you come back on site, in the next week or two, you don't have a closet full of red alerts. Another thing that's come up very, very frequently in the past week or two since we started doing this is we got a lot of customers getting notifications of phishing and spam and such like that. We do have a product called Barracuda Sentinel that we've been introducing into these environments, where it scans your O365 logs. It adds a little bit of AI into that as well, so that if users are sending emails, or if your mailbox suddenly is sending an email out at 4 a.m. and that's not intelligent, or that's not things that are supposed to be happening, there's intelligence put into that will stop that alert or that email coming out, send an alert to our team. So we can add another layer into your O365 where we can begin to look at what type of emails are being sent, where are they being sent to, what words are being sent, and add a little bit of intelligence into that. So as users come back and certain requests are being made, we make sure that those are valid.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. So, Kat, I want to bring you in here. Guys, I appreciate all the information. It obviously gives everyone a lot to think about as we move into this second phase. We want to open this up to any questions that have come in and kind of start addressing what's on people's minds.
Perfect. Sure. Thanks, Dennis. The woman behind the curtain here, I'm Kat Tuttle. I am the marketing and communications manager here for IntegraONE, and I'm just going to be running through some of these questions. So, folks, as Dennis mentioned earlier, we do have that chat function that's going to be in your GoToWebinar toolbar that appears, I believe, on the right-hand side of the screen. So keep those questions coming. You know, anything that's specific to your environment that you want to ask the guys about, we're happy to answer. And of course, if there's anything that you want to look at a little bit more in depth or more specifically after the fact, we can certainly put you in touch with these folks and answer those questions for you more in depth. Okay. So guys, this is a question that's probably a bit for all of you, but it's talking about collaboration solutions and I suppose applications that everyone is using these days. So the question is, what specific collaboration solutions do you recommend for a professional environment and why?
I could take that. So, you know, in today's, this kind of goes back to, you know, taking advantage of the technology that's available to us today. You know, telephone systems are no longer just that. They're no longer just dial tone to make a call and receive a call. They're an integral part of, you know, how a business operates, and, you know, both from a video and a voice perspective. Excuse me. And I think it's important to, you know, to kind of shift that mindset and to start thinking of that as, you know, we can extend that phone system to do so much more than we used to, you know, be able to do it with it 10 years ago. Just to give you some specific examples, from, you know, one of the phone systems that we support very heavily, Cisco Call Manager on-prem phone system. A lot of our clients are running that. And yes, it can function in a completely isolated on-prem environment, but what we're seeing is more of a movement towards a hybrid deployment, where we have the on-premise, you know, on-prem phone system handling, you know, registering all the phones, you know, terminating the PRIs and voice circuits to gateways, and handling that, you know, telephone experience that we're used to. But we're creating a hybrid where we're taking an on-prem phone system, extending that out to the cloud, and bringing in services like WebEx, and allowing WebEx to perform almost like it is on-prem. It's just an extension of that on-prem phone system. If we go back several years, you know, if we wanted to pass out, you know, phones for employees to take home and utilize at their home, it required additional hardware other than just phones. It required, you know, a dedicated VPN appliance to make that site-to-site VPN connectivity back to their headquarters so it can talk to Call Manager. It required, you know, potentially, you know, then it migrated to, okay, we need a VPN client on the phone itself. Things have greatly simplified since then. You know, now we can extend that on-prem phone system out to, you know, outside of the organization by utilizing things called expressways, we're opening that phone system up so that the devices out there can register directly to the on-prem phone system without any dedicated hardware out there. Not to mention being able to utilize, software applications, WebEx Teams that can function as a chat client, a collaboration space to do whiteboarding, file sharing, and also function as a full-fledged soft phone so that the user doesn't need an actual hardware phone remotely as they're working. So, from a collaboration standpoint, I mean, those are the type of things that, we'd recommend the customer looking into to get their phone system or collaboration solution, what they have today, to that type of model. And in a lot of cases, it's not hard to get there. It's just enabling some features and functionality that are already there that, they might not be taking advantage of.
Great, thanks, Aaron. Anybody else want to jump in on that one, or should we move to the next question? Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
throw a couple of bullets on top. I wasn't sure if Brad was going to chime in. Just to say, yeah, I mean, the whole evolution of communications is awesome, right? We went from a hard phone, to a cell phone. Now we've got a soft client, and I think, as Aaron mentioned, right, using the soft client and all the tools that we can extend out to the edge to have them automatically connect in an easy fashion. I'm exhausted using email, right? Show of hands, how many people have, inbox clutter? We personally, we use WebEx Teams and Cisco Jabber, as an IM and presence utility. So a lot of guys are hitting me up via chat, instead of sending, an email that I might have to otherwise read. And it's making us much more productive, right? So for call manager customers that have those services available, hey, let's deploy them, let's get them going, because not only getting away from the inbox clutter, you're going to boost productivity in the process.
Makes sense. Thanks, Al. Okay, let's see here. A couple questions in the same vein. So let's actually move to something a bit different. Brad, I think this is probably for you. So what did IntegraONE communicate internally for getting resources up and running with remote work, I suppose, and then what will be sent getting back?
Sure. I mean, the first things first, we identified that remote work was the way we were going to do business, let employees know that. But more importantly, for their productivity, we went through all of our remote systems and all of our critical systems. And how do we access them when we're working remote, when we're working from home, when we're working from a non-IntegraONE device? So we built a document outlining what those products and software packages were, how to access them, how to log in, go through that entire process front to back, make sure the document was fresh, up to date. We also went through where we could and implemented some additional security features like two-factor authentication, single sign-on, things to make both the experience a little bit easier and a little bit more secure. Not as far as we would like to, as to not be disruptive, but go through that. Now, like many organizations, it's not going to be a light switch we're going to flip back on again and everybody's going to suddenly be back at the office the next day. So we'll reiterate those access methods again as people come back into the office. So scheduling and understanding who's back in the office, when they're back in the office, and then again reiterating again, how do you access those applications back in the office? How do you still access them remotely? And continue with the practice of adding layers of security and simplification as we can.
Okay, thanks, Brad. So we have a question here about just what are the most common issues or themes that you're seeing, like in the last 45 days, obviously attributable to the COVID situation. So Joe, do you want to answer that from a managed services perspective?
Yeah, we've just seen an increased amount of phishing and spam attacks on our users. So it's important to have a good spam filter in place. Anything that's just sitting out there like an 365 or Exchange, put another layer on top of that and increase your security there. That way your users that are no longer behind a firewall, they might be sitting at home. They might be traveling, sitting well, probably not sitting in a restaurant or anything at this point. But when they're outside of the office, having a layer of protection on top of what your typical email is, as well as a familiarity with VPN clients and such. When our customers started to go home, they were working on AutoCAD projects and such that would require them to be in the office. And then when they went home, well, how do I do this? How do I get these big projects home with us? We introduced LogMeIn Pro to a lot of the users so they could just get right back on their desktop. And then a lot of questions came up from that hit the service desk. How do I do this? How do I do that? So, the next time that this happens, or their ability to work from home is kind of granted now, and it's known that it can be productive. Just making sure that part of your onboarding package for your employees is, here's what happens in this scenario, and introducing that into what your daily objectives are to managing your business.
Yeah, great point. Anyone else want to chime in there, or should we move on to actually more of a networking question here?
Biggest pain points and challenges: boredom, walking around the same neighborhood, seeing the same houses. No, honestly, knock on wood, I haven't heard any horror stories, but yeah, definitely. COVID-19 is blowing up the Google database right now for searches, right? So there's tons of campaigns out there, attackers trying to capitalize on the situation. Security never sleeps, neither do attackers.
Yeah, unfortunately. Aaron, I'm going to say this one's probably for you. So the question is whether network performance from providers or carriers like AT&T impacted wireless networks, SD-WAN, during the crisis.
So I haven't seen a lot of impact. Most of these provider networks are built out to such a fashion these days that they can handle an increased load and bandwidth, also multiple failures and things like that. However, what I have seen, even internally here at Integra is, we're starting to use video a lot more than we ever did, because we want that, one-on-one communication experience. Well, what does that require? It requires bandwidth. And we have some users that are fortunate enough to live in a higher populated area that has access to really good broadband services. Those users aren't really seeing an issue. It's the users that are sitting out in a less dense populated area, rural area, that may not have the technology pushed out to them as the more populated areas do. Those folks that are still stuck on DSL, that doesn't handle the video calling like a cable broadband would. So I think individual end user issues, I think we're seeing more than provider backbone issues. So that's kind of what we're seeing.
Makes sense. So more location specific. Actually, Aaron, let me stick with you. I think you touched on this before, but a lot of curiosity around these collab apps and tools. So this question is, can you comment on breaches to tools such as Zoom or House Party, and should we make sure that the apps are removed from work devices?
Yeah, I'll comment briefly, and then I'll probably pass over to Al because it's a little more security focused. But from the reading that I've done on some of these breaches, it's a failure in the application feature and functionality. Whether or not the the end user, as they're coming and joining the meeting, is allowed in manually, or if they have the link, can they join? I've dealt with a couple education customers that have really ramped up end user, or student online learning. And one of the big concerns that kind of came out there, and not saying that there's a security hole around Google and their platform in Google Meet, but I was reading some articles there that in the past, the way that meeting application used to work is you create a meeting, a meeting link, and that meeting link was good forever. It didn't expire. And more so that, the moderator or the organizer of that meeting didn't necessarily have to be present in order for others to join. If you guys noticed as you joined, this webinar, you sat in a holding tank until the moderator opened it up for everybody, where now, Kat has control over, who's in, who's out, what they're doing. Google did make some changes to that effect to make things more secure. But I think that's the same issue that Zoom was having, really, where, the end users coming onto the video conference weren't necessarily being manually accepted. So I don't know if anybody else has any comments on that, but from a WebEx standpoint, the main platform that we sell and we support, there's many security measures in place. You can't get into meetings without the organizer being there. You can set passwords, you can set security rules to tell what the other, the end users can and cannot do in these meetings. Some of the less robust applications may not have those security settings.
Yeah, so earlier I threw a little breadcrumb out there about the Zoom thing because, on one hand, COVID-19, they're doing an excellent job, supporting services for users. I think overnight they jumped from like 10 million to 200 million, something like that. But then, on the flip side of that, security-wise, you got an application that's just littered, with security vulnerabilities. People are attacking them. They're taking a lot of, scrutiny, and they're under a lot of scrutiny right now, and trying to resolve the issues. So, one thing I would like to say is, as you're choosing applications, right, choose wisely. Not every application is created equal. Not every vendor puts as much development into their applications. Right, so we gotta consider, what are we using, the collaboration tools for? Is there PII, personally identifiable information, health information? Is the, any confidential information that we're going to discuss using these applications? Right, highly consider that. Maybe it's worth spending a couple extra bucks per user for, an application that you feel has better security built in. Definitely do a little research there before, choosing one. On that note, vulnerabilities are going to exist everywhere. We can't prevent them. They're out of our control, right? It's up to the vendor who creates the application or the product. But, again, just make sure that you're, putting some thought and consideration before, hopping into an application or making a purchase on something.
Mm-hmm.
I'll touch the house party one too. I think you mentioned, right? That's really controversial. I'm not too familiar with House Party. I think it's another collab app that kind of spun up. People just getting together, kicking around on a mobile app. But controversial because I had read that it seemed like passwords were compromised, yet the people reporting them were extremely good-looking women on Twitter, and they were debating whether or not they were real people or robots. I don't know. But
Right.
Again, I don't think the application itself was compromised. Maybe it was like password reusal, where some people were complaining that their accounts were exposed or hacked. But I don't think anything was set in stone or concrete.
So sometimes it's the reporting that's a little bit fishy there.
Yeah. Weird application, I guess.
Okay. Thanks, Al.
You got it.
We've got just a few more questions in the pipeline here that we'll roll through, and then I may jump in with a couple more general questions for the guys here, but certainly folks, keep the questions coming if there's anything else. And certainly it can be specific to your environment, or it can just be a general curiosity that you have with everything that's going on. So keep those questions coming in the chat area. Okay, so actually, looks like an Al question. What tools are available to look at device updates returning to the office beyond Windows Update?
Tools beyond Windows Update. A whole slew of them. Personally, there's a product I like. It's made by Qualys. It's cloud-based. You can, register. It's a lightweight agent. You can deploy to all your assets. You can register them to the cloud. Gives you complete visibility about the asset itself, system information, network information. But that agent also acts as a lightweight vulnerability scanner because it's reporting all that metadata up to the cloud. And likewise, we can see, what software is installed, what the patch status is. So we've got real-time, vulnerability scanning, if you will. It can also prioritize those vulnerabilities. So, if there's a 0-day exploit available, a 0-day vulnerability, that's running in the wild, or, a public exploit's available for a vulnerability that's detected on an asset, it can actually tell you all of your impacted assets. This way you can kind of prioritize, your patching strategy. Hey, these are critical level exploits exist. We got to take care of this right away, right? Everybody's up Saturday night, working to get the job done, as opposed to, a lower severity vulnerability that, might not be, remote code execution, or, there's no way that the device could be exploited, remotely over the internet. Maybe that makes its way, lower on the totem pole. Just scratching the surface really of Qualys, but again, it's a product that I'm a fond believer in. Also we have stuff on the managed service side of the house too, right? So, Joe, if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and whenever we bring a managed services customer on, and they want us to manage their desktops and servers, we put a tool set out there that we call the Fusion One tool set. And what it does is it scans the devices every couple hours to make sure that there's no updates that are pending for it, and if they are, it executes them, and then it will do reboots after hours. So there's very little impact to the customers, and the devices are ensured to be up to date. But also is important there is antivirus. So that tool also scans about 26 or 27 different antiviruses to make sure that they're up to date and there's no infections. So it just calls the API of what's installed there on the local device, and then brings that back to us. What's also important there is that we're not relying on WSUS for when we're doing updates. So customers can leave their network, go home, go to a Holiday Inn, go to California, go to Texas, whatever the case may be. And anytime the device comes online, it'll report back into IntegraONE whether that device is up to date or not. And if there's issues with installing patches and errors occur, our help desk will get notified, and we'll reach out to the user, tell them we need to get on their machine for 10-15 minutes. And then we can diagnose the issue. So if updates or antivirus things start to break, we'll get notified of that the minute they tap into the internet and it gets back to us.
Makes sense, Joe. Thanks. This actually leads into another managed services question, Joe, that was sort of partially answered, but here's a specific one. So has the crisis changed the monthly network admin checklists?
Yeah, so it's probably from a managed services customer that we've been going on site to regularly. So what we did is we tried to shift as much work as we could about 60 days ago, in the middle of March, to remote work. So the checklist that we do, so with a lot of our managed services packages, what we do is we create a checklist based upon the client's environment, and then we allocate the correct resources to it. So what hardware manufacturer that client's using, whether it be Fortinet, Cisco, etc. We have a lot of tools, and we have a lot of engineers that specialize in them. So we create a checklist upon what we want to do with that client and get done on a monthly basis. So we start to do that. We started doing that remotely. So we sent notifications to all of our customers in March that we were going to start doing the server checklist, the network checklist, the backup checklist on a remote standpoint. If they needed anything, please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, at 8 o'clock on next Thursday, we'll be starting to go in, and then at about 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock each day, we just follow up and send a message into the client saying, hey, this is the 10, 15 things we got done. Here's what's remaining for the day. Do you want to add anything to the list? So that's how we met that for our clients, and then we ran through the backups, we ran through their firewalls, routers, see if there's any updates pending, and if there was downtime that needed to happen, scheduled later that night, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, so the impact of the users that were remoted in was minimal.
Okay, makes sense. Thanks, Joe. I'm going to ask just some general questions that were actually on our last webinar, and I thought they were really, really good and worthwhile topics here. So folks, keep any other questions coming that you may have, or if you'd like further clarification on any of those topics, definitely feel free to jump in via the chat box. So Brad, I'll direct this to you, and then anyone can jump in. What do you think are the most sought after skill sets that we're going to see companies hiring for or training for in light of the crisis?
Yeah, I mean, including ourselves, I think you're going to see a lot of people who are really interested in endpoint control and visibility, and having a skill set of somebody who understands endpoint management from every perspective. A lot of which we've talked about today. So that's just mobile device management, but visibility into what's on there, how to control and sanitize those devices as they come back in. So that's a lot of what we're seeing, a lot of what the partners we have in the industry are seeing, and those people we get our information from, as well as things we're interested in for ourselves. The second part is cloud. So when we go from an environment that's in the cloud and we're at the office or we're at home or wherever we need to be, the cloud theoretically is always there for us, and we always access it similarly, or we can essentially secure it. So we're seeing a lot of interest in cloud solutions, whether that be public cloud or private cloud, just to make it easier and more consistent to administrate, deploy, and develop as we become a more hybrid workforce, or possibly become a more hybrid workforce between those people who are in the office and those people who are working at home as that shifts around.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Anyone else on that one?
Visibility is definitely key for me. That's my that's my topic that I'm driving home, today, because if you have complete visibility, right, you can take care of just about anything. Whether it's a compromise that you're dealing with, right? What's the insight? You got to have, syslog, you got to have that reporting up to a console. You can't just have, alert after alert after alert, right? We need to, parse that data, to make it usable, but also have the data. So we have, something for reference. So I'm definitely driving the visibility as a, a common theme here, these days as well.
Having those things in place for next time. Yeah.
Yep.
Knock on wood, there will not be a next time to this particular situation, but we know things can happen. All right, guys, last question here. Again, just a general one. The question is, what would be a good checklist to have in place, like an emergency situation checklist, or does such a thing exist? Does it have to be on a one-on-one basis, or can you kind of prepare in that way?
I can take this. I think, it's going to be unique to each business. Brad sort of touched on this a little bit. You need to know what applications need to be accessed remotely. How do you access those applications? What type of security, might or could be added to make things more secure, as you do try to work remotely. So that's definitely one of the things. The other thing that, definitely needs to be addressed is hardware and licensing. Manufacturers and such as Cisco did a really good job kind of stepping up to the plate and offering extended licensing or demos or trials of some of their products, such as WebEx, AnyConnect, Duo, and things like that. But these are all things that have to be eventually addressed. So in the event that something similar does happen in the future, making sure that you have the appropriate licensing and capabilities to roll the workforce remotely is extremely important. Hardware, I kind of, mentioned from a collaboration standpoint that, there's a lot of, technologies out there now that can allow you guys to work remotely and still utilize your on-prem collaboration solution without hardware, right? I mean, using soft phones, using, a hybrid collaboration deployment where you're extending that on-prem out to the cloud. However, there are some limitations for some users. Some users want to have that hard phone on their desk. They want to have that, be able to turn it on speakerphone, or they want to be able to pick up that handset due to maybe some other noise constraints or environmental constraints, in their home office. So making sure that you have a stockpile of phones that could be deployed to the home if needed. So some things like that. I mean, I think those are, but they're going to be unique to each company and each business.
I think, when we take a look at it at a very basic level, if your company has gone through any business resumption planning or disaster recovery planning, effectively what we did during the pandemic is execute a piece of that, if not all of it. In your DR plans, you might have been planning for a physical location that's no longer accessible, or a need for employees to work remote or work in another building, another office, another location. Some of those same processes and documentation you went through for your DR and business resumption could be reapplied to situations like the pandemic and a 100% work from home workforce. If you haven't done any of that work, go out there and look at some of those pre-canned DR and business resumption plans and checklists that are out there. Pull from them, because you're going to see a very similar set of questions, a very similar set of checklists and answers there.
Makes sense. Anything else from you guys? Okay, perfect. I'm going to go ahead and just share a few housekeeping items as we wrap up here. Is my screen visible?
Yeah.
Yes, great. So folks, the first thing I'll mention is we do have a post-webinar survey that's going to be headed your way by email sometime today. That'll include a recording of today's webinar if you want to review any bits and pieces of what's been said, and a link to the survey. So the survey is just a great tool for us to get a sense of what you might like to hear from us in the future, or what we could do better in some webinars, or what you enjoyed. Also, there is an opportunity for you to submit any further questions that you may not have gotten a chance to ask today during the webinar. So we would very much appreciate your feedback. If you're interested in keeping up with IntegraONE and further activities and events that we do host, best way to do that is to just check back for regular updates with integraone.com/events. So especially in the current climate, we're obviously doing a lot of remote activities, which would include things like webinars, more interactive roundtable discussions, more technical virtual labs, things of that nature. So do check back with that page, and that'll give you a sense of what we have coming up in the next weeks or months. And on that note, I just want to say a big thank you for everyone's attention and your time today, and obviously to our presenters. Thank you very much for sharing everything on the call, and for being available to the folks on the line here for questions after the fact. Stay safe, everyone. Stay healthy. Enjoy this beautiful weather, as Dennis mentioned, and hopefully we'll see you on a future webinar soon.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Yeah.